My name is Tina Roach, and I'm 31 years old. A few months ago, my parents sent me a picture on our family group chat. It was their new house, a white 2-story home surrounded by tall oak trees, sunlight spilling over a freshly painted porch. Everyone was in the photo: my mom, dad, my brother Tom, my sister-in-law, their kids, even our family dog Max. Everyone, except me. It started with a simple message notification. I was sitting at my desk, surrounded by half-finished paintings and the faint smell of turpentine, when my phone buzzed. It was from the family group chat, the one I had muted months ago, because it only reminded me of how far apart I'd drifted from everyone. I unlocked the screen and saw it. A picture that froze me in place. There they all were, my mom and dad, standing proudly in front of a freshly painted white house with bright blue shutters. My brother Tom was beside them with his wife and their 2 children, grinning ear to ear. Even the old family dog Max was sitting obediently at their feet, looking like he belonged in a picture-perfect postcard. Everyone was there. Everyone except me. Below the picture was a short caption written by my mother. The family that stayed together. Just 6 words. Yet they carried the weight of every unspoken hurt I'd ever felt. I stared at the screen until the edges of the photo blurred through the tears forming in my eyes. My throat tightened, and a familiar ache pressed against my chest. The same one I'd felt the day I packed my bags years ago to chase my dreams in another city. I wasn't surprised to be left out. I had learned long ago that distance, both physical and emotional, had quietly rewritten my place in the family. Still, seeing it displayed so openly, so proudly, like an announcement to the world, felt like someone had drawn a line and placed me firmly on the other side. The caption was innocent enough, maybe even unintentional, but it screamed what I had always feared: you don't belong here anymore. I didn't reply to the message. What could I have said? Nice house. Looks beautiful. The words stuck in my throat like gravel. Instead, I put the phone face down on the table and just sat there in silence. Around me, the walls were filled with my art, vibrant strokes of color, landscapes from places I had seen, portraits of people I had met. My life was full, but at that moment, it felt painfully empty. I thought about how I had always been different. The child who didn't want to stay in one place. The daughter who painted instead of following the family business. The dreamer who left instead of settling. When I left home at 23, I told myself I was breaking free to live my truth, and I did. But I hadn't realized that freedom came with loneliness. The kind that seeps in during quiet moments, when no one's watching. I wondered if my mother noticed my absence when she took that photo. Did she hesitate before sending it? Did she think about me for even a second? Or had I simply become a name they didn't mention, a chapter they decided to close? As the hours passed, I kept looking at that picture, analyzing every face. My father's proud smile, my brother's arm around his wife, the children carefree and happy. It was a portrait of unity, a reminder that families, no matter how complicated, find ways to stay close. But somehow, I wasn't part of that closeness anymore. I told myself I didn't care, that I had built a life of my own, a life where I didn't need to fit into anyone's picture. Yet, deep down, I knew it wasn't true. I missed them, the noise of family dinners, my mother's laughter, my father's jokes, the sense of belonging that once came so naturally. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that caption again. The family that stayed together. It echoed in my mind like a quiet accusation. I realized then that being left out of a photo wasn't what hurt the most. What hurt was the realization that maybe, over time, I had started to believe I deserved to be left out, and that was the deepest pain of all, not being forgotten, but convincing yourself that you're forgettable. Growing up, I was always the one who didn't quite fit the mold. While other kids talked about becoming doctors or teachers, I dreamed about colors, shapes, and light, about creating something beautiful that could make people feel. I spent hours sketching on the backs of my school notebooks, smudging pencil lines with my fingers until my mother would sigh and say, "Tina, you'll ruin your uniform again." My father used to tell me that art was a hobby, not a future. He wasn't unkind, just practical. He came from a world where stability mattered more than passion, where success was measured in paychecks and predictable routines. And in that world, there was no room for someone like me, someone who wanted to chase sunsets and sketch dreams on paper. My brother Tom understood that world perfectly. He followed every expectation. He was the one who helped Dad with the family hardware store, who went to church every Sunday without complaint, who never raised his voice or challenged the rules. He was the golden child, the one who stayed, and I was the storm. I questioned things. I wanted more than a small town and a steady job. I wanted the thrill of creating something new, even if it meant uncertainty. So when I got accepted into an art program in another city, I thought my parents would be proud. I still remember the day I told them, the way my heart beat fast with excitement, the way I waited for their reaction like a child waiting for applause. But instead of applause, there was silence. Then came Dad's sigh, heavy and sharp. "Tina, art isn't a career. You can't live off dreams." And Mom, trying to soften the blow, added, "Maybe you can take classes here, dear. Stay close to home." But home had started to feel like a cage, full of love, yes, but also walls too tight for who I was becoming. So I left. I left with 2 suitcases and 100 unspoken words. I told myself it was just for a while, that I'd come back when I made something of myself. But weeks turned into months, and months turned into years. Calls became fewer. Family dinners went on without me. Eventually, they stopped asking when I'd visit. It's strange how love can turn into distance without anyone meaning for it to happen. They loved me, I know that now. But they couldn't understand me. And because they couldn't understand me, they kept me at arm's length. There's a certain kind of pain that comes from being misunderstood, not because you've done something wrong, but because who you are simply doesn't fit into someone else's picture of love. It's the kind of pain that makes you question yourself, your worth, your choices. For a long time, I wondered if they were right, if chasing art was foolish, if I had thrown away my family's approval for nothing but empty colors. But every time I held a brush, I felt alive. The world outside disappeared. I could breathe again. Still, at night, I would think about Sunday dinners, about laughter echoing through the old kitchen, about Mom's gentle humming while she cooked. I missed it all, even though I pretended not to. I missed belonging somewhere. Tom once sent me a text. "Mom says you're wasting your talent painting for strangers." I stared at the message for a long time, then deleted it without replying. I told myself it didn't matter, but it did, because every word carried the weight of the gap between us. Years later, when they sent that photo, the family that stayed together, I understood what they meant. They weren't trying to hurt me. They just didn't know how to love someone who had chosen a different path. Being different had made me strong, but it had also made me lonely. And sometimes strength and loneliness walk hand in hand, quietly reminding you that the price of becoming yourself can be the people who no longer recognize you. It was a quiet Thursday evening when the knock came. I wasn't expecting anyone. The sun had just slipped behind the city skyline, leaving streaks of orange fading into gray. I was rinsing brushes in my tiny kitchen sink, lost in the rhythm of my own solitude, when the soft but persistent knocking pulled me out of my thoughts. When I opened the door, I froze. There they were, my parents. My mother, clutching a pie dish in her trembling hands, her smile unsure. My father stood slightly behind her, his expression unreadable, his posture stiff as if he wasn't sure he should be there at all. For a moment, I thought I was imagining them. They hadn't visited me in years. The last time I saw them in person was at Tom's wedding, where we had exchanged polite hugs and careful smiles, avoiding anything real. "Mom. Dad." My voice cracked. "Hi, honey," Mom said softly. We were in the area. I almost laughed at that. They lived 3 hours away. But I stepped aside anyway, motioning them in. The scent of oil paint and turpentine filled the small apartment. My father's eyes drifted toward the canvases leaning against the wall, unfinished portraits, cityscapes, and abstract colors. He didn't say anything, but I saw the old discomfort flicker in his gaze. The same one I'd grown up recognizing. They sat down on the couch, awkwardly close to each other, like guests at a stranger's home. I waited for them to speak. Finally, Mom cleared her throat. "Tina," she began gently, "we need a bit of help." Those words landed between us like a fragile glass ornament, delicate, unexpected, ready to shatter with the wrong move. "Help," I repeated. Dad nodded, rubbing his hands together. "The new house. It still needs painting. Your brother's busy with work, and, well, you've always had a good eye for color." There it was. The reason they'd come. Not to reconnect, not to apologize, not even to ask how I'd been. They needed something, and for the first time in years. That need pointed to something I was good at, something they had once dismissed as useless. I wanted to be angry. I wanted to remind them of all the times they had told me that art wouldn't get me anywhere, that I was wasting my potential. But instead, I just sat there, feeling an odd mixture of resentment and tenderness. My mother looked around the apartment, her eyes softening as they landed on one of my paintings, a small piece of our old backyard, the house I grew up in, captured in warm light and long shadows. She smiled faintly. "You really are talented, Tina." I didn't respond. Compliments from her now felt like apologies wrapped in politeness. They stayed for tea. The conversation was light, almost artificial. We talked about the weather, the new neighborhood, Tom's kids, everything except the years of silence that lay between us like an invisible wall. When they finally stood to leave, Mom touched my arm and said, "Think about it, sweetheart, just for a weekend. We'd love to have you home. A home." The word lingered in the air long after the door closed behind them. That night, I sat on the couch staring at the spot where they had been sitting. The air still held traces of their perfume and aftershave, familiar scents that tugged at something deep inside me. I wanted to brush it off, to convince myself they had only come because they needed something. But beneath that practical request, I sensed something else, something unspoken. Maybe it wasn't just about paint. Maybe it was their way of reaching out, awkward and late, but genuine in its own flawed way. Still, I couldn't help but wonder, if they hadn't needed me, would they have come at all? That question followed me to bed, heavy and bittersweet. I stared at the ceiling in the dark, caught between pride and longing. Part of me wanted to ignore them, to protect the walls I had built around my heart. But another part, a quieter, softer part, wanted to believe this was a beginning, not just a request. I didn't know what to do then. All I knew was that after years of silence, they had finally knocked. And for reasons I couldn't explain, that meant something, even if it hurt. After my parents left that evening, the apartment felt heavier than before. Their visit had stirred something inside me, old memories, buried feelings, and that quiet ache of unfinished conversations. I sat by the window, the city lights flickering in the distance, my untouched tea growing cold on the table, my thoughts tangled like threads I couldn't separate. Part of me was angry. Angry that they only came when they needed something, angry that after all these years of silence, it took a paint job to make them remember I existed. But beneath the anger, there was another feeling I couldn't ignore. A small, fragile warmth that whispered, they came. It had been so long since they'd knocked on my door. Maybe their reasons weren't perfect. Maybe it wasn't the apology I had once dreamed of, but it was still something. A beginning. Still, pride is a stubborn thing. It builds walls that feel like safety, but are really just loneliness wearing armor. I'd told myself for years that I didn't need them, that I had moved on, built a life, become someone strong and independent. But that picture, the one they sent with the caption, the family that stayed together, still stung every time I remembered it. Why should I go back? Why should I be the one to bridge the gap when they were the ones who had let it widen? I asked myself those questions again and again. But every time I did, I kept thinking about my mom's trembling hands holding that pie, my dad's quiet voice asking for help, and the flicker of hope I saw in their eyes. They looked older, tired, and underneath their words, I sensed something that went beyond a home renovation, a silent plea for connection. That night, I went through some old sketchbooks I hadn't opened in years. Between pages of half-finished drawings, I found one that stopped me. A pencil sketch of our old family home. The porch light was glowing, the windows warm. My parents were sitting on the steps, and a younger version of me stood beside them, barefoot and smiling. I remembered the day I drew it, the summer before I left. Looking at that sketch, I realized something painful but true. Love doesn't disappear when people hurt you. It just hides behind disappointment, waiting for forgiveness to pull it back into the light. I knew going back would mean facing everything I'd avoided. The old judgments, the uneasy silences, the possibility of being misunderstood again. But maybe it wasn't about them anymore. Maybe it was about me. About whether I was willing to let the past define how I gave love now. The next morning, I woke up early and stood in front of my easel, staring at a blank canvas. The sunlight spilled across the room, soft and forgiving. I took a deep breath and picked up my brush. As the first streak of color touched the surface, I felt something shift inside me. A quiet acceptance. I could keep holding on to pride, and it would keep me safe. But it would also keep me alone. Or I could choose love, not the easy kind that asks for nothing, but the hard kind that forgives even when it remembers. Later that day, I packed a small overnight bag. I didn't tell anyone. I just got in my car and started driving toward the town I once couldn't wait to leave. The road felt both familiar and foreign. Every mile brought back memories, laughter, arguments, Sunday mornings, the smell of Mom's pancakes, the sound of Dad's old records playing in the living room. As I drove, I thought about how love and pride often look the same from the outside. Both keep you from reaching out, both convince you're right, but only one brings peace when the day is done. By the time I saw the "Welcome to Cedar Hill" sign, the decision was made. I wasn't going back to prove a point or to erase the past. I was going back because despite everything, they were still my family. And I was done letting pride win the battle that love had been fighting for years. The drive back home felt longer than I remembered. The highway stretched endlessly ahead, and with every passing mile, I felt a strange mix of dread and peace. My hometown appeared on the horizon like a ghost from another life. The same streets, the same trees, but it felt smaller somehow, as if time had quietly folded it inward. When I pulled into my parents' driveway, the new house stood tall and still, bathed in morning light. It was beautiful but empty. Like a shell waiting for warmth. The paint was unfinished, and the walls, though new, carried the coldness of something untouched by life. Mom stepped out first. Her face softened the moment she saw me. "You came," she said, her voice almost breaking. I smiled faintly. "You asked for help, didn't you?" Dad followed her out, standing a few steps back, as if afraid one wrong move might make me turn around and leave. I could see it in his eyes. Guilt, relief, pride, all tangled together. He didn't know what to say, so he said nothing. Inside, the house smelled of new wood and fresh beginnings. The walls were blank, plain white. waiting to be transformed. Mom handed me a small box of paints they had bought, the cheap kind from a hardware store. I looked at it and chuckled softly. "You know this isn't what professionals use, right?" She smiled nervously. "Well, you're the professional. We figured you'd make it work." And so I began. For hours I painted. Brush in hand, I moved from wall to wall, covering them with warm shades of color. Soft yellows that caught the sunlight, gentle blues that breathed calm, and warm golds that wrapped each room in quiet comfort. Every stroke felt like a conversation I had never had with them. Dad watched from the corner sometimes, offering small comments like, "That looks nice," or "Didn't know paint could change a room like that." His tone was careful, almost curious. Mom would bring me lemonade or snacks. Hovering in the doorway, she'd start to say something, then stop, unsure of how to bridge the silence that years had built. But as the days passed, the silences grew softer. The air between us began to change. One evening, while I was finishing the living room, Mom came to stand beside me. Her voice was gentle when she said, "You know, your father and we didn't mean to leave you out. That photo, it wasn't supposed to hurt you." I paused mid-stroke, the brush trembling slightly in my hand. "It did," I admitted quietly. "It felt like I didn't exist anymore." She nodded, eyes glistening. "We thought you didn't want to be part of us. You seemed so far away, living your dream. We didn't know how to reach you." I looked at her then, really looked. The lines around her eyes, the wariness in her smile, and beneath it all, the same love I had grown up with, just older, quieter, and flawed. "I never stopped being your daughter," I said softly. "I just needed to find myself." For the first time in years, she reached for my hand, and I let her. We stood there in silence, the smell of paint surrounding us, the golden light falling over the room. Later that night, Dad joined us at the dinner table. He didn't say much, but as he passed me the bread, he muttered, "You did good today, kiddo." It wasn't an apology. It wasn't even acknowledgement. But it was something. It was his way of saying, "I see you." Each day that followed, the house grew warmer, not just from the colors, but from the quiet healing that filled its rooms. We laughed again, hesitantly at first, then freely. And somewhere between the first stroke of paint and the last, I realized I wasn't just helping them finish their home. I was helping rebuild what we had lost. My art had always been a way to express myself, but now it had become something greater. A bridge between us, a language of forgiveness that didn't need words. When the last wall was done, the house glowed softly in the evening light. It no longer felt like a stranger's home. It felt alive. It felt like family. And for the first time in years, so did I. The house was almost finished when the moment I had been avoiding finally came. The rooms glowed with color, laughter had begun to slip naturally into our days, and even the silences between us no longer felt so heavy. But healing is never complete until the truth has been spoken. The kind of truth that sits quietly in the corners, waiting to be acknowledged. It happened one afternoon while I was painting the trim of the kitchen window. Sunlight poured in through the glass, warm against my skin. Mom stood nearby, wiping down the counter, humming an old tune I hadn't heard since childhood. It was one of those songs she used to sing when she cooked on Sundays, the ones that made the house feel alive. Out of nowhere, she stopped humming. I glanced over, and she was just standing there, holding the same cloth, staring at me with a look that made my chest tighten. "Tina," she said quietly, "can I ask you something?" I set the brush down. "Of course." She hesitated, then took a deep breath. "Why did you really stop coming home?" Her voice wasn't accusing. It was fragile, almost trembling, like someone bracing for an answer they already feared. I looked down at the paint on my hands, at the streaks of color running across my fingers. For a moment, I didn't know where to begin. There was too much to unpack. Years of hurt, pride, distance, and silence. But for once, I wanted to tell her the truth, not the polite version I'd always given. Because I didn't feel like I belonged anymore, I said softly. Every time I came home, I felt like a stranger. You all had your own world. Your routines, your business, your stories. And I was just the outsider who chose differently. She looked down, her eyes filling with tears. We never meant to make you feel that way. I know, I said. But you did. That picture you sent, the one with everyone except me, it felt like confirmation, like I'd been erased. She walked closer, her voice trembling. That wasn't meant to exclude you. We thought you wouldn't care, that you were too busy, too far away. We told ourselves you had your own life now. I felt something break open inside me, not anger, but understanding. They hadn't known how to include me because they thought I didn't want to be included. I had built my walls, and they had built theirs. We were all guilty of misunderstanding each other. I never stopped being part of this family, I said quietly. I just needed you to accept me for who I am, not who you thought I should be. She reached for my hand, her grip trembling. We should have tried harder to understand you. Behind us, I heard footsteps. Dad had been standing by the doorway, listening. He walked over slowly, his eyes heavy but soft. Your mom's right, he said in a low voice. We didn't get it. I didn't get it. You were brave enough to chase what you loved. And I thought that meant you were walking away from us. I see now it wasn't that simple. For a moment, none of us spoke. The house was quiet except for the faint ticking of the clock and the birds outside the window. Then Dad reached out and placed a hand on my shoulder. I'm proud of you, kiddo, he said simply. Those 4 words undid something inside me. All the years of trying to prove myself, to earn their approval, to make them see me. It all came undone in an instant. Tears blurred my vision as I whispered, that means more than you know. Mom pulled us both into an embrace, and for the first time in a long time, it didn't feel forced. It felt real, raw, honest, and healing. Later that evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and light poured gently through the freshly painted walls, I realized the moment of truth had finally arrived. Not through confrontation, but through vulnerability, the courage to speak and the grace to listen. We had all been waiting for this moment, to say the words we'd left unsaid for too long, and in that shared silence afterward, surrounded by color and light, I knew that forgiveness had finally found its home. The last morning in my parents' house came quietly. The paint had dried, the rooms glowed softly in the early light, and the air smelled faintly of new beginnings. A mixture of fresh color, coffee, and peace. I walked through each room slowly, running my hand along the walls I had painted. Every brushstroke told a story now, not just of colors, but of forgiveness, of words finally spoken, and wounds that had begun to heal. Mom was in the kitchen, humming again, her voice light this time. Dad sat at the table reading the paper, his glasses sliding down his nose like they always did. For a moment, I just stood there, watching them. They looked the same, yet somehow different, gentler, softer, as if they too had been painted over with love. When Dad noticed me, he smiled. You heading out today?
Yeah.
I said, just after breakfast. He folded the paper, nodding. You did good, Tina. The house feels like home now. I smiled back, but it wasn't just the compliment that touched me. It was the word home. For years, that word had felt like something I had lost. A door closed, a light turned off. But standing there, I realized home wasn't a place that stayed waiting for you. It was something you built again when the time was right. After breakfast, Mom handed me a small box wrapped in a ribbon. Before you go, she said, we wanted you to have this. I opened it carefully. Inside was a small, framed photo. It was the same picture they had sent weeks ago, the one that once broke my heart. But now it was different. This time, they had printed a new version. In it, I stood with them, smiling, paintbrush in hand, my clothes splattered with color. The caption beneath read, "The family that found its way back." For a moment, I couldn't speak. My throat tightened as tears filled my eyes. Mom reached out, touching my arm gently. "We wanted to fix what we got wrong," she said softly. I hugged her tightly. "You did." As I drove away later that morning, the road stretched out before me like a ribbon of light. The town faded behind me. But for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was leaving something unfinished. The weight I had carried, resentment, loneliness, pride, had lifted. It was replaced with something lighter, something whole. All those years, I thought being different meant being alone. I believed that in choosing my own path, I had chosen separation. But what I finally understood was that love doesn't vanish when you step away. It waits. Sometimes quietly, sometimes painfully, but it waits. And when you're ready to reach back, it's still there, even if it takes time to recognize it. Forgiveness, I realized, isn't about erasing the past. It's about seeing it clearly. The hurt, the misunderstandings, the choices, and deciding that love matters more than what broke it. The house I painted wasn't just their new home. It was a canvas for all of us. Each stroke of color had filled the cracks between us, had turned silence into conversation, distance into closeness. We didn't fix everything. No family ever does. But we had found a way to stand together again, not as the family that stayed together, but as the one that chose to. As the city skyline came into view, I rolled down my window, feeling the wind brush against my face. The world felt wider, but not as lonely as before. I realized then that transformation doesn't always come with grand gestures. Sometimes, it arrives quietly, in a knock on the door, in a shared meal, in the soft sound of forgiveness being spoken through actions rather than words. I thought about my parents, about the photo in the frame, and smiled. Love had come back, not perfect, but real, and that was enough. Because in the end, the greatest art I ever created wasn't a painting or a portrait. It was the act of healing, of turning pain into color, and of learning that sometimes, coming home isn't about returning to a place. It's about finding peace within the people who taught you how to love in the first place. Family isn't about who stays together physically. It's about who finds their way back to each other emotionally. Forgiveness doesn't erase the past, it paints over it with understanding.